All right, guys. Happy to be here again. I recognize a few familiar faces from about 3 months ago. I know at that time I way overdid it with slides and walking you through decks. So as you can see here, I've only got 3 or 4 slides I'm going to torture you with. The idea that I wanted to kind of run by you guys is this idea that at Microsoft we're calling cognitive search. Kind of this combination of APIs and search technology to take all sorts of different information and package it into some sort of searchable framework. So that, from our standpoint, that is not necessarily Azure related. I know we come in here and talk about Azure a lot, but from this standpoint, it has a lot more to do with code and development and how you acquire some of that data than it does putting data into the cloud or anything like that. And that becomes a little bit of a gray line or a gray area as to what is cloud, what is Azure versus what is just an API that you may call as a developer or a program manager. You know, those APIs may be hosted in the cloud, but in this case, we're not looking for cloud adoption or anything like that. It's simply an API with a lot of back-end technology behind it that sits in the cloud. How you consume that and pass data to and from it is entirely up to you. And in this case, you're not really leaving any cloud artifacts into the cloud or anything like that. So that's kind of just my disclaimer that, we're not, although we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff and talk about some cloud technologies, we're not really talking about cloud adoption or jumping on the Azure bandwagon per se, or in entirety at least. So this is kind of just my quick little walking deck, a couple little bullet points I want to walk through and show you what's available, and at the end we'll kind of walk through a couple mini demos to show you what the end result may look like. And again, first thing I'm going to do after I just talked about Azure is take you to the Azure website. We have at Microsoft developed a lot of these new cognitive APIs. So I always like to paint this picture. If you're looking to make intelligent applications, as we like to say, you've got this spectrum, and over on the left side, you've got what we call cognitive APIs. These are machine learning based APIs that we at Microsoft have already trained and packaged and lit up for you. So from that standpoint, they're simply an API that you can call. And then way over on the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call our machine learning workbench. And if you're a data scientist, or if there's any data scientists, or any, I know they're in high demand, that machine learning workbench over on the other end of the spectrum is where they're going to live. That's where they can take their own data or your data, push it into these data modeling tools, and build their own models. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. In the middle, we have a couple tools that we offer that allow you to take some of the models that we have and tweak them and train them. But the point I'm trying to make is there's a broad spectrum of tools available that you can use to add these AI or cognitive capabilities into any applications that you're making. So today, some of the stuff we're going to look at are cognitive APIs around images, right? So this is just a website you can go to. You can Google this. I've got it at the end of the deck. You can snap a picture if you want. But in this case, this is an API that we provide. You can pick any kind of image you want. So if you had an image warehouse or anything like that, you could take those images, post them up to this API that we offer. And when you do that, it'll spit back a bunch of data for you. It'll tell you, that image has something to do with outdoors, city, building, it's a photo, predominant color, white. Says boat in there, I'm not sure where that's coming from, skyscraper. You get the idea. It tells you the format, it tells you the dimensions. predominant colors, those kind of things. You can do other kind of images. So this is a line drawing, clearly not a photograph. Long story short is this cognitive API built around imaging is meant to deliver you intelligent data about what that photograph contains.
Chris, when you say post it to it, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay, so bear with me, I'll get to that. I'll actually show you in the real world. Another one, and this is the one we're going to kind of focus on later on today, is OCR technology, or reading out textual data from photographs effectively. So in this case, there's a photograph, and it's smart enough to be able to read that in and analyze it. And again, this is machine learning. This is not your dad's OCR back from the 1980s or 1990s. This is modern machine learning based algorithms going into this. We'll come back to this a little bit. You can do that on handwriting. And you'll notice it's not ever perfect. You know, the idea is not to necessarily translate word for word from an image. The idea is to be able to capture that data out and then get things like confidence scores and, you know, these are bounding boxes. So it's telling you, here's a box that I use to interpret this word, if that makes sense. It does things like recognizes images and celebrities. You can also do things with video. So if you think about video is essentially just a series of images. So if you take a sampling type approach and say, whether it's every 1 second or every 1 hour, I'm going to grab a screenshot from that video and pass it through any of these cognitive APIs as an image. And so the point of this page and the opening part of this presentation is just to make you aware that these APIs are out there. Down at the bottom of this page, you'll see, I love this little utility here. It kind of shows you all of the cognitive APIs. Again, these are the left-hand side ones that we've already pre-canned. And there's, I believe there's 30 something of them. You know, computer vision API, content moderator is great, because if you have user-provided content that you're showing out on your screen or your website, you may want to put that through some content moderation and make sure there's not curse words or images that you don't want out there. That's how bots are attacking these websites, is just pushing bad content, and among other things, it can mess up your reputation and be embarrassing. So again, there are several of these cognitive APIs that you can explore. Speech recognition, language interpretation. You know, you can, some of these language, this Lewis one in particular, has a lot to do with bot technology, where you want to interact, have an automated agent that interacts with a chat. And we're not going to go through all these. Again, I'm just kind of pointing out that there are 30 something of these that you can begin experimenting with. To get to Mike's question, the way that you can actually get started here, and this is where you can start as simply as using some of the web tools that we provide. You know, all these things you can put in a URL and test it out through the website. But to really take advantage of that, you probably want to go get an API key that you can use. And this is where you have to kind of go through the Azure portal. You know, maybe Jim or somebody else can do this if you guys are interested. You know, there are a couple ways you can do it inside the portal. I'm just going to go in here and create a resource, and I can type computer vision or any number of kind of hints in there and find the one I'm looking for. And then all I have to do is hit create. And from there, I don't have too much to do. I simply have to put in a name, name it whatever I want to name it. I pick a region. I'm not going to get into that, but clearly you want to kind of coordinate your region and pick things in the same geographical area so they have less latency. You can pick a pricing tier. We offer a free pricing tier, so you can interact with these all for free, albeit within kind of a governed environment where you can't hammer away at it.
And pretty much everyone here has an MSDN license, and so if you have that Visual Studio license, then you also get free time every month on Azure.
Yeah, sorry, I clicked out of there, but you get the idea. You create that, and once you've created that, it'll just take a couple seconds. Oh, sorry, I went to the wrong place. Once you create that, you're going to end up in one of your resource groups in Azure. You're going to end up with a listing here that looks like this. And there's not much to it other than maybe a couple quick starts and some getting started type documentation. But the main thing we're concerned about is our key here. So this is just like it says, key to the castle, right? As long as I have that key, I can start chipping away at that API. Kind of the lowest friction way that I can find to interact with that is Postman. You guys familiar with Postman? Use that? Most developers have a tool similar to that, or Postman's great. But all I need to do is I can go read through the quick documentation in the portal or the website, the Azure website. It'll give me things like URLs. So in this case, I have to put in my West US 2 to coordinate with that. But I don't, other than kind of telling you which operation I want to do, I'm simply calling an HTTP request, or a post in this case, and I'm posting up an image. So I've got my headers, I've got my key that I copied from my portal. I'm telling it what my content type is. And then as my body, I'm simply choosing a file and pushing that up. So when I send that over to the Azure servers, it's taking that image that I uploaded and it's parsing it out. In this case, I'm doing that OCR operation, and it's going to bring back to me the information that it's parsing out of that document. I'll show you the document that it's running real quick, just because I'll come back to this in a minute. So this is kind of a messy, memo here. Not very clean. It's got a little bit of handwriting in there. The type has clearly been scanned in after a long time. So that's what we posted up to our API. You can see this one's a little bit slow because there's a lot of text on there. Maybe while we're doing that, let's look at the computer vision API. So again, on this one, I am showing this Starbucks storefront. I mean, just some random picture I grabbed off of Google Images, right? So when I send that, I think I messed up my keys here. You get the idea. A lot of JSON coming back. It's akin to the JSON we were just looking at in the website when we were clicking images back and forth. Mike, does that kind of address your?
Yeah, I kind of see how you would do it in a one-off way.
Sure.
I'm curious if I had a batch of images that I want to stream on a somewhat regular basis in an automated fashion, what that would look like, and kind of what the response time would be associated with.
Sure. Let me show. Take a slight detour here if you guys don't mind. So I'm in Visual Studio, and in this case, I had thrown this up for another demo, but I'm using an Azure function written in .NET. So the fact that it's an Azure function is inconsequential. The code, though, is pretty much the same. And in this case, I'm only, make sure I get the right one. I'm only calling the API once, but you can imagine putting this into code in some sort of loop. Or if you are in the cloud technology or in Azure per se, you can do things like have a function that sits there, and whenever a document gets dropped into something like blob storage, that function automatically fires off. It gets that image content from the blob, and it goes and executes, for example, one of these API calls out to one of these services, brings the data back, and then whatever you do with it is, up to you guys. Take that data and use it to make your applications more intelligent, whatever that means to you. Code-wise, this is my class that I'm using to call that. You can see I'm passing in the subscription key through a secure configuration setting, but I'm just using you guys are all .NET, just our good old friendly HTTP client. I'm telling it, here's my request header with my subscription key. Between here and here, I'm building just one URL, and then I am simply just posting that up, right? So there's no magic there. It's very low friction. We're not dealing with complex OAuth authorizations to be able to call this type of thing. It's simply just that subscription key that we're using. Kind of good with that?
Perfect, yeah.
And so you could certainly put that into some sort of loop. If you had a giant image repository or a bunch of PDFs that you wanted to process, you can programmatically loop through those. You could parallelize all that and process all that data in big batches.
And how responsive is it if you were doing a new onesie-twosie, like somebody uploaded an image and you wanted to run it through the algorithm and then come back with metadata that you would post?
Yeah, I mean, these calls are usually lickety-split. This is not working clearly. But, I mean, I wouldn't say instantaneous, but they're no more than a second.
Real time.
Yep, real time. So you guys good with that? You kind of get the idea of what these functions are there for and maybe what we can do with them? So we talked about calling that from Postman, right? Sorry. So I want to kind of to that point, we're already touching on that. Normally I like to run this as a hands-on lab. We certainly don't have enough time to mess with that today. But I want to show you a logic app. If you guys are, and again, I'm using some Azure technology to illustrate it. But if you guys are familiar with logic apps, it's just a low friction way, especially for non-developers, to kind of implement some rather complex workflows. So in this case, it's codeless. I like to put it in terms of microservices. Both logic apps and Azure functions are low friction, kind of serverless, microservice type technologies that you can use to build small little pieces of application, and then you just glue them all together with different kinds of code. In this case, I've built this logic app, and it sits there and it watches my blob storage account that sits up in the cloud. Whenever a file arrives there, and in this case, I'm kind of cheating. I'm actually doing a polling. So every 1 minute, it polls that storage, brings me back a batch of images. I read in the batch, or I read in the image, I get its path. Logic apps are really cool. We could make a whole day out of these if we wanted to dive in. I'm going to gloss over most of it. But what I want to point out, especially with logic apps, is that these connectors are all built right in. So I have a pre-built connector to analyze an image. And all I have to do is pass my image content into that. And then it gives me back all of those same data feeds that I got from the other application. Let's just run one real quick because I'd like to show you what the end result looks like. Just whatever, any one of these. So all I've done is I've just dragged and dropped an image up to my cloud storage account. If you're an S3 guy, it could be S3. And so because my logic app is actually fired up and running there, it saw that blob hit the file, it executed, ran it through in parallel 3 or 4 different cognitive APIs. That's what these kind of this parallel path is here. And the beauty is I can kind of come in here and diagnose anything that may have happened as a result of that. I can see the raw JSON coming back. I can analyze, if there were a bunch of red exclamation points, I could figure out where my app went wrong. But again, the point is that these are all very easy snap together connectors. And under those connectors can be very complex APIs, in this case, these cognitive APIs. And at the end of the day, I've just dumped this data into Cosmos DB. You can kind of see what the data I come back. We talked about content moderation. We have an image analyzer that will take a look at any kind of image and say, okay, is this adult content? Clearly, you don't want pornographic images getting submitted through your site. But it also does things like they call it racy. Is this a racy image? So I've got some pictures of some girls playing beach volleyball, certainly not pornographic, but may not be appropriate for all contexts. So it'll give you both scores independently so you can decide, hey, I'm a Disney website. I don't need that kind of racy content getting uploaded to my site. So that's, if you can see here, that's what some of these scores are. All right. Now that you got kind of the lay of the land and what those APIs can do and what they can be used for, let's take a look at some other applications. And that's kind of where this search concept comes in. Clean up my mess a little bit. So back to my image that I showed you. You guys may have picked up on this. This is kind of a weird memo document. You can see it comes from the FBI regarding the assassination of President Kennedy. This is a weird one. So the context is that about 2 years ago, the government released a whole big batch of documents related to the JFK assassination. So many documents that it would have taken months to kind of read through that. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of pages of data or content that you want to be able to slice, dice, search through, find correlations, and those kind of things. So this is one of those documents. The reason this one, and I find this one fascinating, is apparently somebody tipped off the British consulate before the assassination that there was going to be an assassination attempt on the president. So that seems a little fishy to me. But you get the idea. Just one of many documents that got released through that somebody just happened to stumble upon using some tools that they had available to them. So that, if you want to go kind of look at this is all the data that got released. You can see it's a ton of zipped up files. Each one of those files is a ton of PDF documents. I'll show you those. Content, right? So here's my zip files just to give you an idea of what's in there. 22 gigabyte, 23 gig worth of junk of all sorts of goodies. So that brings us to this guy, Coram Thompson. This guy is as a Microsoft employee, and he kind of started this initiative. He was actually on a mission, and he had written back letters to home, and his mom had saved them for him, and at some point gave them back to him, and he thought, oh, I want to go kind of archive those and read through them. So he developed this pipeline or a concept. I mean, it's not one specific tool, but just the term cognitive search. And he took those handwritten letters and ran them through an OCR process, read in that data, and then showed his mom, hey, look, I can show you all those letters that I wrote home to you. Well, then the JFK files came out, and he thought, man, that sounds like a good application for that. So him and his team, they went and built this demo that I'll show for you. I'm not going to go through the video here. You can kind of see Coram. He does a good job presenting it. And like I said, he's kind of the man behind this process. So go check out this video when you have time. It's pretty interesting. But they took all that and they packaged it up into a GitHub repo. So you can come into GitHub and you can take and download their code and all the pieces here. And that is what I have here. This is not necessarily an overwhelming amount of code. The fun, important parts of this are there's a data enricher function, data enricher and an enricher functions. There's a cognitive skills package, and then he's got a UI package. So let me show you what the end result of all of that is. And this is where, if you guys have your computers open, you can come check this out. So this website is jfkfiles2.azurewebsites.net. So they've taken all umpteen thousand pages of those JFK files, passed them through those cognitive APIs to OCR the data out, but they've also taken things like images. So this image of Lee Harvey Oswald, that passing that through the cognitive API not only tells you who that is, it was able to interpret that based on the image content. He tells you that he's posing for a camera. Doesn't say if it's his yearbook photo or what, but you can kind of guess there. And it has the numbers on there. So his mugshot gets data attached to it. It's not just an image. Now there's plenty other documents in here. This is lots of chicken scratch. But you can kind of see that in a lot of cases it does a pretty good parsing some of this out. Other times, omittee is not committee. But you can see over on the left side where it's highlighted, that C's kind of crossed out. So you can, based on the quality of the text that you're trying to read in there, you can make assessments as to how well that's parsed that out. And clearly the end result of all of this is that I can do things like, this guy, Jim Garrison, he was part of the Warren Commission. He was the head investigator. If you've ever seen like the JFK movie, I think that was Kevin Costner was him. But it does things beyond just parsing out the text. It uses an API we call the entity linking API. And this is a experimental API, cognitive API that we use, but it does things like in not only interpreting words, but starts to begin linking concepts. So if you're talking about Mars, the planet, then it knows that that's Mars, the planet, not Mars, the god, or a candy bar. So using that in the context of the JFK files, it does things like it starts to associate, in a lot of these FBI files, they used code names for different people. So it begins to make associations that, and I forget what all their code names are, but Lee Harvey Oswald had a code name. And if you, I'll remember what his code name was, but you can search for his code name and it will make the association that code name is Lee Harvey Oswald, and therefore it kind of groups those together. Now you can imagine that that's quite a big job. I want to go back to the code now and kind of just do a quick walkthrough. I mean, this isn't my code, so I'm not an expert on it. But before I do that, I want to show you kind of the high-level architecture of this whole thing. And again, the idea is that this JFK demo file is not particular to the JFK files. It is simply a prescriptive approach to being able to, they call it document cracking, right? Any kind of document I have, that can be a PDF that's scanned in, it can be a photograph, it could be data from a database. I need to crack that open and get the raw data out of it. So that's that document cracking piece. Once I have that, there's this the idea of these cognitive skills In this case, we call it enrichers. So those enrichers are anything you can code up as an interface and plug into your pipeline, and then all of your data will simply pass through a pipeline of enrichers, and each one of those enrichers will do their part to add value to your chain. And at the end of that, you store all that data in some sort of annotation store. In this case, we kind of used DocumentDB and some of that kind of stuff. But to really make value of that, you have to add some sort of search capability. And in Azure, we have just our baseline search functionality that you can apply on top of that data. So that does a great job. You have just data, you plug it into the search system, and it understands how to index that, and you can call that through an API. In this case, they simply used an open source framework. So the UI here is an open source framework that they used, and just plugged in some of the hooks in there. But point is, when I'm searching in here, and when I search in there, I'm actually searching through that search capability. So code-wise, this is still just a sample application. Clearly, if you're going to bet your business on this, you'd go through here and clean it up. But I want to point out a few things for you. Setup-wise, if you guys want to go after the fact and try and mess with this, go to GitHub, download the files. It's all a .NET application. The GitHub site will walk you through a couple steps you have to do inside of Azure to get things like the keys and the stuff that you need to wire up there. In my case, where's my config file? I think it's this one. So in my case, I had to come in here. You have to come in here. You have to make sure your APIs match up, your endpoints. We talked about that earlier when we were looking at Postman. I have to get my keys in there. So this is my cognitive API key, same one that I used in Postman when I was executing raw APIs. I have to tell it where to store some things. I have to give it my search service key. So that's the service that comes in after the fact to be able to search this. And then I have to wire it up to some blob storage. In this case, it just kind of use the out-of-the-box settings. I just have to make sure I have that connection wired up. And that's done through this section up here. In this case, the actual execution is done by this data enricher program that you can kind of go through. It's just a more or less a console application. When you run it the first time without any kind of command line parameters, it does a little bit of maintenance for you, creates a couple of blob storage containers and makes sure that your system is working. So if I were to just F5 run that, and the GitHub documents walk you through this, but if I were going to F5 run that, it would pop up a console app and it'd go through a couple smoke tests basically to say, yep, it looks like you're good to go. And it actually passes up this photo document here through the system to make sure it goes through the pipeline. So again, I'm kind of just teeing this up for you in case you guys want to look at it more. When you actually want to run through the execution, let's see if I still have my so once you compile that application, sorry, bear with me. Once you compile your application, you end up with just, as you'd expect, an executable that you can run. In this case, my data enricher.exe. And if I want to, when I actually want, so now, I'm at the point where I've got a blank canvas, I've got everything wired up, but now I want to start chugging through my documents. So I can get the right window here. I am simply calling my executable. I'm passing in a command line argument, and I'm pointing to my local directory that has all of my content. So I'm basically going to say, okay, take this PDF, every PDF that's in this folder, open it up, make a JPEG out of it. So I'm essentially screen grabbing behind the scenes the page, turning it into an image. I'm taking that image, I'm posting it up to the Cognitive API, I'm getting that data back, I'm stuffing it into a database essentially, and then I've got a search index that sits on top of that. Does that track with you guys? The beauty, and we won't get into it much, the beauty of part of that is that document cracking piece, right? And kind of the ingenious part of it is that they're taking those PDFs that aren't, there's several different kinds of PDFs, but some PDFs are native PDFs and you can actually go suck the text out of there if you've got the right tools. But the JFK files, they're all scanned images, right? So we open those up as PDFs, but then we screen grab the data out and that's what we're passing in. So that cracking concept is that kind of image manipulation that's going on behind the scenes. So the only point I wanted to make is we're not using a native PDF interface there other than to visualize that image.
Chris, can I ask
Yeah, please.
two quick questions. So how robust is the language support?
I believe it's only English right now. I've heard that maybe there's some Chinese endeavors there, but I think for the sake of this conversation, it's pretty safe to assume it's in the early stages, so it's English.
Do you know about the rate they added? Are they planning on adding languages?
I do not. I will, when we get to the end here in a couple of minutes, I'll tease the fact that what they've built here is now so popular that they're actually packaging it up into more of one cohesive service, kind of a product offering. So look for that at Build. They may have some announcements there. I don't know. I've talked to this guy, Coram. He's a real nice guy. But I'm not part of their team, so I don't know exactly what they have planned. But it is a very cool service. Like I said, they're very busy because so many people are interested in kind of their demo and their technology that they used.
Is it open source? Is it contributable?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the underlying APIs, so the cognitive APIs that are on Azure, I don't believe those are open source just because that's all the proprietary machine learning that's happening under the covers. But the actual JFK files they're definitely open source. I don't know how willing they are to take contributions or pull requests on that. I'm sure they would, especially if you're fixing. I will tell you that the code out there is not, there's like, let me just give you a hint in case you do mess with this. And you can, if you're serious about this and you jump in and want to take a look at it, hit me up because I can get you over a couple humps that I ran into. One of the APIs URLs has changed. So the code that you'll download from GitHub hasn't been updated with that fix yet. So like I said, hit me up if you start messing with this and run into trouble. And I can get you over those humps. The point I wanted to make here, if I run that end product, the end executable, and pass in my file, you can see that it's starting to open up those files and read them in. It's relatively slow. If you were going to do all 13,000 documents or anything like that, you'd probably want to make this more efficient. I think Coram told me they basically just loaded this up in a cloud virtual machine and let it run for a few days to process through everything. But certainly you can be smarter about that in a real enterprise type setting. So I'm not going to let that go too long, but hopefully that makes sense and you have the idea of what we're looking at there. As this slide I kind of swiped from one of the teams there is the cognitive search API or the cognitive search service that will be coming out at some point. We are looking for private companies that would, that are interested in that technology, so at this point, it may be easier just to wait for that to come out in preview, but it's kind of a cool thing to mess with. I don't have too much more.
You survived the earthquake, by the way.
Yeah, I was kind of watching for that. It's nice to know when it's coming.
Yeah.
A couple links, if you guys snap a picture of this or let me know, I can send you these. I think the idea here is just to get the juices flowing, make sure you're aware of those cognitive APIs. As I was kind of saying at the beginning, you guys are governing your own internal systems, but make sure you understand that these are simply APIs. If you use Twilio, if you use any 1,000 other APIs out there, they're no different than that. It's more what you can use to attack them and use them. You guys have any questions? Anything I can clarify?
Do they have a service where you can just upload a file and have it translated to see it work? Or do you have to build the program with the API?
I think in that one, you're there's a little bit of a, I won't call it steep, but there's definitely a setup process to get that part running. But if you're just want to use I'm going to try and run this again real quick. You can do it in I won't say 30 seconds, but it took me all of about 2 minutes to go in, create a key in my Azure account, copy it out, tinker with Postman for a few minutes to get the post and the file upload right, and run it. So at the end of the day, that's the nuts and bolts of taking that content and parsing it out through the OCR technology. So I'm not sure that's as quite as smooth as you're looking for, but there's definitely lower friction ways to kick it around. Good to go?
All right, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for coming.